Joining us now remotely is Kahlil Greene, otherwise known as the Gen Z historian. With over 8 million likes on TikTok, Kahlil hosts a hidden history series with the mission to share knowledge about history, injustice, politics, and culture from a new perspective.
Hello, what's up?
Hi, Kahlil. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Of course, thank you for having me.
So I want to start off by asking you to talk a little bit more about your Hidden History series. How did you get it started?
Yeah, so I got started back in January of 2021 on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And I made my first video ever about the whitewashing of Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy and how he, in the eyes of the American public, was de-radicalized over time. Specifically, I talked about a time where the FBI actually had been found out to sabotage his work and, of course, try to sabotage the work of many civil rights activists. From there, I just started recounting more hidden history series and stories under the tagline, What America kind of covered up as the creepy, crazy, and once again, covered up parts of American history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what's interesting, I think, especially about your Hidden History series, is that your videos are coming out at a time when we're seeing some work to keep those histories hidden, particularly history that does center Black and brown voices. How has that affected your approach to choosing which stories to highlight, and what has the response been from other Gen Zers?
The great thing about the work that I do and the use of social media is that, unlike as we see, unfortunately, with many school systems around the nation, I'm not at the mercy of a school board voting to strike down a part of my educational curriculum that I share on my platform. So I love sharing stories that I might imagine would be left out or struck down in school curriculums, especially K through 12 curriculums in these states where people are trying to cover up things about American history and trying to really change the narrative from one that's critical and realistic to one that upholds an American mythology that is at odds with the realities of so many marginalized communities throughout the US. So the way that I like to choose my stories is by focusing on something that's happening in the world right now. For example, we can talk about the Indian Child Welfare Act, and something that I might create a video about, which I will be doing soon, is the history of the act and the history of the realities of how Native American children were treated throughout American history in just the past century. So I like to expand on what's happening in the real world through storytelling and through the stories that I share on my platform.
Mm-hmm. And these are powerful stories. They're very moving. What has been the response from, whether that's people your own age, other TikTok users, your family? What is the response that you get?
The response is overwhelmingly positive. I mean, I had a huge boost last year when the New York Times featured me in their Up Next series. And from there, I started getting all sorts of inquiries and invites for collaboration and partnership from all over the nation, all over the world, really. I've even done international interviews through Zoom. And it's been really fulfilling to see people like teachers and young people say on my videos, hey, I didn't know that before I watched this video. I know that now. I'm going to share that with someone, whether it be a family member, a friend, a student, or just someone that I disagree with, so that they can see your perspective, and they can learn more about history in the way that the viewer did. So just seeing the response, which has overwhelmingly been super positive and super responsive to the stories that I'm sharing, has been one of the most fulfilling parts of the work that I do.
With the stories that you're sharing, they are innately political, unfortunately, even though they shouldn't maybe be. How do you see the way that our government and perhaps other institutions can better harness the power of content creators like yourself to enhance social good?
I was actually one of 30 TikTokers invited to a briefing that the White House held shortly after the war in Ukraine broke out with the head of national security as well as the communications director of the White House. And I thought that was just one great example of the transparency that the White House and other government institutions can have with the American public by way of communicating with content creators. We were not paid to be there. We were not given any talking points to come out with, but we were shared information in the way that you would with traditional reporters. And I think that there was a lot of overwhelming support for this initiative, at least when people started to understand what was going on, understand that we were authentic, that we were able to share our own perspectives and be critical of the information that we receive. So in as much as governmental organizations and entities can partner with creators and share them information so that they can be transparent with their own audiences, I think that's the best way to collaborate and partner with us.
Mm-hmm. What I find really fascinating is that you are an activist and your activism is coming through the internet, which sounds absolutely insane. And probably, I think back to Martin Luther King Jr., 1960, would probably not imagine that somebody like you, somebody like Winter could be using social media or the internet in this way. What do you think has really encouraged your generation to take this social justice fight across the globe, really, through the use of the internet?
It's the power of the internet. Back in the 1960s, grassroots organizing was hugely laborious, and you had to knock on doors and spend months and months just even creating awareness around a protest. Whereas nowadays, someone can make an Instagram flyer using like Canva, post it on their story, and then have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people then go and reshare it. And that's what we saw drive a lot of the organizing that happened back in 2020 to create some of the largest protests ever in American history, and a movement that had participation in all 50 states and around the world. And that's something that you couldn't necessarily do with the technology of the past, but you can do today. And I think young people are starting to be aware that social media and the internet gives us power that we wouldn't have otherwise, that these larger, older institutions are not granting young people. So we go out and seize it for ourselves by utilizing the things that we know best, which is digital media and virality and communication, to then enact change in the way that we see fit.
I know we've been focused really on the positives that can be harnessed through social media. What are some of the cons that we need to be aware of, whether we're activists like yourself or that you want to make sure that our institutions know as they're trying to, again, harness this power of content creators like yourself?
If I had to choose one main one that I really want to push,
just one.
Yeah, I'll start with one and maybe go into a few others. But I really want to hone in on the idea of combating disinformation. I think that's a primary goal that everyone should have. Something that I always champion is including sources and including your logic behind what you're saying and how you're using evidence and primary resources and other verifiable sources to then share information online. We're even seeing it right now with a lot of what's happening in Iran and the protests. There was a huge sort of headline around like the protesters and how many were going to be executed, and now there's a bunch of confusion on whether or not that statistic is true or not true, and it's all because there's not a good culture on social media or a good just standard of ethics when it comes to sharing information and sharing people's perspectives with facts. So the first thing that I would say is like everyone just needs to be aware of disinformation, educate and equip yourself to determine whether or not something is valid, and always cross-reference and check multiple sources before you determine a fact as actually valid that you find on the internet. After that, I think the second one is definitely going to be the hate and just like the general culture of when people are faceless and they don't have any form of accountability behind what they say, that they can say some of the meanest things. I've dealt with it on a few of my videos. Actually, I had one video about Elvis Presley and his role in appropriating Black culture, and I actually got like a 2,000-word email from a random account just like calling me all sorts of names and just super hateful things, right? So it's a very weird place to be on the internet and have so many people dislike you who you have no idea who they are. But I think if we can create more of a culture, however that might happen, of just like civility, that would be a primary goal for me and something that everyone should be aware of exists right now as an issue online. Mm-hmm.
As you continue your journey as our TikTok Gen Z historian, what do you want government to take away from the lessons that you're teaching? What types of values that you want to portray for our government to say, this is what we need to be doing for our young people?
The first thing I would say is to be transparent. So many of the stories that I cover on my account are stories of the government committing injustices towards the American people, but at the same time, things that people are not necessarily aware of. And I think the issue is that whether it be school curriculums or just generally when it comes to atonement and reparation, the U.S. government doesn't do a great job of acknowledging the harm that it's done in marginalized communities in the past. So just being transparent, promoting education, and being upfront with shortcomings and mistakes is something that's hugely important. One great example is if you go on the CDC website right now, they have a whole webpage dedicated to the Tuskegee experiments and what went wrong there and how it was a governmental agency that affected all of this harm against Black men, medical experimentation and medical harm. So just being transparent is number one. I'd say after being transparent, the most important thing that government can do is actually work with young people and be collaborative and bring us to these decision-making rooms, decision-making tables for us to share our perspective. Once again, the White House has been doing a great job of that with content creators this year especially, but I want to see other government organizations, whether it be the State Department and International Affairs or whatever multitude of government agencies exist out there, bringing on young people to have our voices heard in terms of constant and current day events.
Absolutely. Kahlil, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it so much.
Thank you so much.